Welcome back to Munchausen's Proxy, where we are out of town and so slightly late with the spoiler review of the premiere of Amazon Prime's The Rings of Power. Now, last season, Amazon premiered the season with 2 episodes, probably because they knew if they only went with 1 episode, then people would drop out of the series quick, seeing as little happened. This season, they have decided to start with 3 episodes. I'm going to go through them one by one. Why? Because I have thoughts, and if I did more than one, the video would be 7 hours long. To recap last season, Amazon treated us with a crap fest of unholy magnitude that roughly 2/3 of viewers bailed on before the last episode. In eras past, that was an audience attrition rate that would get you canceled before the full season was even aired. However, when you pour $1 billion into a vanity project and your company is making shows and movies for fun, ratings don't seem to matter. They collected a purposely diverse cast to tell stories Tolkien never did and showed once more that when Hollywood goes off script with IPs written by masters, shit winds up hitting the fan. Hard. See Game of Thrones Season 8 for further examples. The show was led by an actress so wooden that Brie Larson probably watched with envy, and showed once more why the strong female character that Hollywood has become obsessed with is nothing more than an actress doing buff dude face. Poorly. We watched 8 episodes of someone who, in Tolkien's work, is one of the most powerful characters in all of Middle-earth, flounder around like an idiot as she played at commander of the armies, when in the books she was a massively powerful sorceress. Further, they flout Tolkien's writings on her character by making her completely fall for the semblance and lies of Sauron, something she never did in the books. She spent 8 episodes trying to find and kill Sauron while tooling around Middle-earth with, wait for it, Sauron. We were also treated to the most unelvish looking elves you could imagine. Psychotic hobbits that were not hobbits, multiracial dwarves despite the fact that dwarves spend almost their entire lives out of the sun, and more manufactured drama than you could shake a stick at. Oh, and the Numenoreans who were both racist and so nerfed that only Galadriel gave them competition. And all of that culminated in a Rube Goldbergian contraption that created Mount Doom against all laws of physics and volcanology, and created a pyroclastic flow that most of our characters somehow survived despite a wave of searing hot gas, ash, and lava crashing over them. Oh, and the 3 rings of the elves were created too. Now that we are all caught up with the first season of The Rings of Power, let's see what they managed to cobble together for us for Season 2, shall we? After their recap of Season 1, we get a ridiculously long black screen before an orc emerges from the darkness holding Sauron's crown. Not Aragorn from the first season has transformed into a blonde-haired dude that looks more like an elf than any elf we have seen thus far on this show. And yet he still looks like Tolkien elf off of Wish. It is a new actor playing him, and he is no better in this opening scene than most everyone was in the first season. We get a wide shot of Forodwaith, the northern fortress Galadriel found in the series premiere. Or at least that's what it should be. The new Sauron speechifies, declaring a new age in which he will bring a new vision, one of unconditional conquest. He then describes for the horde of orcs what he is planning with the Rings of Power, telling the orcs that many of them will die, but their sacrifice will bring the entirety of Middle-earth under one rule. His rule. Needless to say, some of the orcs are less than keen on this plan. He kills an orc leader who tries to stab him in the back, and Adar steps forward. He takes the crown, and Sauron kneels to be crowned once more. Adar pauses in placing the crown. Sauron looks up in confusion, and Adar reverses the crown and uses it to stab Sauron. The orcs pile on and stab the ever-living out of him. Of course, this is not suffered without Sauron responding. He throws them off and begins butchering orcs. Alas, the orcs once more gain the upper hand, laying him low. He closes his eyes, and you hear him muttering in either Elvish or the Black speech. It is hard to tell which. This is when Adar stops the orcs from their massacre, leaving Sauron a bloody mess on the stone floor. Adar slowly approaches the mess and nudges Sauron's shoulder with his foot. He does it again, and suddenly a blinding light streams out of Sauron's mouth, causing an explosion of freezing air to wash over the surrounding mountains. The orcs and Adar all wake up, and Sauron's body is gone, his clothes left behind. The orcs see this and begin praising Adar. He tells them they are now free, and he walks into the crowd of adoring orcs. The camera focuses on the bloody clothes, and we see blood flowing into the cracks of the stone floor, going down and down to drip into a puddle. A rat comes along a bit later, and bloody tentacles explode out of the puddle to attack the rat. Sometime after that, the tentacles form a humanoid shape, slowly crawling through the cave it was in to reach the mountain slopes outside. It crawls along until it collapses on a track. Sometime later, a woman rides by in a horse-drawn cart, driving over the mass that was Sauron. Blob Sauron latches onto the cart, and a few yards down the track we hear the woman scream and the cart stops. The horse rears and breaks loose, running away. A man emerges from the wagon and is not Aragorn. He inhales deeply and smiles, laughing a little before heading back down the track. Later, we see not Aragorn huddled over a campfire, looking like he is having evil thoughts. The next day, he runs into a bunch of human refugees fleeing the orc armies. The leader warns him that only death lays the way he is heading. Sauron notices the sigil the old man is wearing, a sigil of the old royal house of the Southlands. The old man's family used to serve them, and he wears it to remind himself that fortunes change, even for the mightiest. He tells Sauron it isn't as grim a message as he thinks. It can be hopeful. He then offers Sauron to join them in their search for sanctuary, somewhere across the sea that is probably Numenor. They then cut to a night scene on a ship, Sauron having joined the humans. He starts awake, and the old man asks what haunts his dreams. He tells the old man he has done evil. The old man replies that he needs to see good each day until it becomes a part of his nature. And because not Aragorn is aboard, of course they are attacked by a sea monster. The old man winds up pinned beneath a broken beam. He calls for not Aragorn to help, but he steals the man's sigil and is then washed out of the ship, as the rest of it is destroyed by the sea monster. He floats underwater and watches as the monster comes for him, but at the last second the monster veers away, shaking its head as if to throw off an unwanted passenger. Not Aragorn then swims to the surface and pulls himself up on some wreckage. He winds up once again on a makeshift raft made of debris with other survivors when they spot a woman swimming towards them. Not Aragorn stirs himself from brooding and goes over to help her up. But what he sees is Galadriel and spouts really bad dialogue at someone we know is still in Eregion. After a blessedly truncated opening title sequence, we see Elrond and Galadriel galloping through a forest. Galadriel is trying to catch Elrond, grasping for a pouch that presumably has the rings of power in it. She is calling for him to stop and give them to her. Elrond splits away from her as she goes around some bushes. When she comes out the other side, he is gone. She goes back and rides the way he went, only to find herself surrounded by 4 spearmen, ordering her to come with them on the order of the king. When she is taken to the king, he is looking more than a little pissed. He demands to know if it is true. He doesn't specify what it is, but the look on Elrond's face clearly shows he spilled the beans about not Aragorn. Galadriel tries to dodge the question, but the king wants an answer. She tells him that not Aragorn was no man, that she was deceived. And this is where the nerfing of Galadriel once more makes itself plain. At no point in the works of Tolkien was Galadriel deceived by Sauron. As a matter of fact, neither were Elrond or Gil-galad. All three saw through the guise and sweet words Sauron used, perceiving the evil despite his fair form. Anyway, Elrond tells her that she was not deceived, but blind, completely ignoring the fact that a supposedly not blind didn't see it either, and neither did a not blind Celebrimbor, although in the books it was Celebrimbor that was fooled by Sauron. The king wants to see the rings. Elrond advises against using them, saying that they cannot know what Sauron did to them. And this is where the show again breaks lore to its detriment, because the elven rings were not supposed to be forged first. First were forged the 7 rings for the dwarves and the 9 rings for men, with Sauron's help. Celebrimbor then created the rings for elves on his own. Sauron went to Mordor to create the One Ring. With it, he sought to dominate the other rings. The elves, Gil-galad, Galadriel, and Círdan, hid their rings from the One Ring's dominion, though not literally, since all 3 rings were worn throughout the Third Age. Celebrimbor was captured and tortured for the whereabouts of the 7 dwarven rings, infusing them with avarice to infect the dwarven race, and then the 9 ring-bearers of men were captured, turning them into Nazgûl. All of this within the context of a war between the forces of Sauron and the alliance of elves, men, dwarves, and the Númenóreans that would lead to the opening battle scene of Peter Jackson's The Fellowship of the Ring. With the elven rings being made, as they were, at the end of the first season of The Rings of Power, that whole series of events is thrown, and the time compression the idiots running The Rings of Power decided to write into the script exacerbates the problem, since all of that is supposed to take place over the span of 1,800 years. Anyway, Gil-galad tells Elrond that the last leaf of the tree will soon fall, and then he will be forced to evacuate the elves back to the Undying Lands. The rings might not only be the last hope of elves, but all of Middle-earth, since without the elves, the rest of Middle-earth doesn't stand a chance against Sauron's forces. Elrond urges him to destroy the rings, since they may be the way Sauron gains the power he seeks. And the entirety of Elrond's argument seems to rest on some seriously nebulous mights, could-haves, and maybes. When the king insists, Elrond turns away. Galadriel tries to get him to obey, a serious turn of character for her vis-a-vis the insubordinate mess she was in the first season. Elrond then goes all Gollum, clutching the pouch as he says she knows he cannot before he does the Peter Pan off a cliff and into the waterfall that flows near the tree. The king orders his men to find him and the rings. Back in Mordor, Mount Doom is still erupting away, in case you were wondering, as they give us a close-up of it before we see a line of human slaves being herded by orcs, one of whom happens to be not Aragorn. He smiles when he sees them crest a hill overlooking the orc base. They get there, and Krusty McFarmer tells them that they will be fed if they work the soil. If not, they will feed the soil. Adara looks on with a smile. Each new human is brought before Adar's dilapidated throne, where they have to swear allegiance to him. If they don't, they are killed. If they do, they are branded with the symbol of Mordor. When it is not Aragorn's turn, he tells Adar to let his people go or he will die. Adar tells him that his orcs have defeated the men of the Southlands, the elves that came to help them, and even the Númenóreans from beyond the sea. They fear nobody else. Aragorn tells him that since the defeat, Galadriel sought out a wizard to instruct the elves how to forge a new weapon. He repeats the words Galadriel said to him in the barn, hinting that the sorcerer has a weapon that will enslave the orcs into his army, something that can be prevented if they come to terms. Adar refuses, telling him that he will talk or Adar will cut the information out of him. He calls Adar's bluff, and Adar has the orcs beat him and throw him into a cell. One of the orcs asks Adar if Sauron could return, but Adar says he is definitely dead. His face, however, suggests he does not buy his own words. Then we see the wizard stumbling through a night-dark wasteland, sans Nori, which immediately made me think it was a dream sequence. He looks up at the sky and sees the constellation he has been looking for shining above the direction a branch happens to be pointing. He begins muttering an incantation, turning the stick into a wizard's staff. One that looks an awful lot like a certain wizard from the Third Age who should not have arrived on Middle Earth yet. When he touches the staff, it gives him visions that jolt him awake. It is morning and the sun is well up. He and Nori are walking along when she asks him if he had his dream again. She tries to get him to tell her about it so she can maybe help him puzzle it out. We also see that they are being watched by someone in a gold skull mask looking through a spyglass. Nori then sees some stone trees they had already passed. The wizard thinks there is some evil confusing their path, but Nori just wants him to admit they are lost. He tells her not to panic. She shoots back that they have not had anything to eat since they ran out of snails. He leans against one of the trees and she gets a speculative look on her face, smiling. He starts to look apprehensive when he sees it. He realizes what she wants and is not liking it, remembering what happened the last time he brought a tree back to life. She gives him puppy dog eyes and he agrees, making her back up. A lot. He puts his hand on the ground and the pebbles and sand move around it as he moves to touch the tree. After a few seconds, the tree explodes, hurling him away. Nori begins laughing, telling him he did it. They will eat for days. He looks up to see bugs streaming out of the shattered tree. That night, he's staring morosely at a bug on a stick. He tells him to relax. She asked him to magic up some food, and he did. He is worried that he lost control. She reassures him that he just needs to learn control. Out of nowhere, he begins to describe his dream and the branch under the stars. When he stops, she asks what happens when he touches it. He replies that some things are best not shared aloud. When she tries digging for more, he smiles and tells her maybe wizards aren't always fair in what they say and do. She smiles back and tosses him a roasted bug. He starts telling stories of home, getting homesick. He tells her it's okay to be homesick. He gets homesick too, even though he can't remember home. And then he gazes off to the horizon and sees a light. They douse their fire and get ready to leave. Back with Not Aragorn in Orc prison, a warg is chained in his cell, growling at him threateningly. Rusty McFarmer then comes in with some food, trying to cajole Not Aragorn into telling him all he knows about Sauron. He turns his head quickly, startling Krusty. Mad, Krusty throws the food on the ground, and two orcs come out of the darkness to help Krusty beat Not Aragorn. He promises Krusty that once Adar lets him go, he will kill Krusty. Krusty laughs, telling Not Aragorn that Adar doesn't even remember he is there. They cut to Adar listening to him being beaten. Later, Not Aragorn slowly picks up a bone, and the warg growls again. He holds the bone out for the warg, and it lunges before being brought up short by its chain. It tries again and bites onto the end of the bone. Not Aragorn holds onto it and begins muttering an incantation, staring intently at the warg. The beast slowly calms and lets go of the bone, then gently takes it from Not Aragorn. In an elven village on the water, we see elven soldiers ride by over a bridge, under which is hidden Elrond. Apparently, it is the village in which Círdan's shipwright works are located, Círdan being one of the lore-accurate bearers of the three rings of the elves. Círdan would eventually give his ring to Gandalf when the wizard arrives in the Third Age. We see Círdan watching his apprentice put the finishing touches on a piece of a part of a ship being built. He watches the sunset and later goes back to his workshop where he senses someone is hiding. Elrond comes out and tells Círdan that he has come to him because he is the oldest and wisest of the elves, and he had nowhere else to turn. Elrond tells him that elves are facing the biggest threat in an age. Círdan asks him what the thing he carries is, as it has a feel to it louder than the sea. Meanwhile, back with the king, he has written a letter to Celebrimbor warning him Not Aragorn is Sauron, and not to trust him. The messenger is sent off with a warning not to trust any stranger on his way. The messenger and everyone else present leave except for Galadriel, whom the king is giving side glances at. She thanks him for trusting her, but he shoots that down. He doesn't trust her, for her actions have left him no other alternative besides aligning himself with her. He should put her in chains and cast her into the Fettermoors for her actions. When she asks why he hasn't, he replies that he is still considering it. She swears to kill Sauron and put things right. They go down to the map table where his troops are waiting to report that they have found no sign of Elrond anywhere water touches land. Galadriel suggests he is not trying to escape, but to find someone to help him either sway the king's thinking or destroy the rings. Someone older. Someone wiser. Elrond places the pouch with the rings on a table in the workshop, telling Círdan that he can examine them. He doesn't feel the need. He has felt Celebrimbor's work before. Círdan laments that Celebrimbor may have finally gotten his desire to craft something that could sway all who beheld it, since the rings have turned elf against elf. Elrond suggests that maybe it was not his hand that produced that effect. Círdan points out that Elrond himself told him that Celebrimbor crafted the rings himself, without Sauron's hand. Elrond argues that maybe, and there he goes again with the maybes again, the rings are a ploy on the part of Sauron working towards an end they can't see yet. Círdan repeats what Gil-galad argued. He asks Elrond if he is willing to accept being responsible for the destruction of the rest of Middle-earth when the elves are forced to leave, and he replies he is, if it means not falling into Sauron's trap. Círdan smiles at the moron and tells him he does his father proud. Why, I have no idea. The old elf picks up the pouch and tells Elrond that in an age past there were battles in which the very bones of the continent were used as weapons. It left marks upon the earth, one of which happened to be beneath the waters of his bay. It is a crevice so deep none but Manwë knows how deep. He suggests casting the rings into the depths, which is when they hear horses outside. The king and Galadriel have arrived. Outside, Galadriel asks to speak with Elrond first, hoping to sway her friend back before he has to face the wrath of the king. Gil-galad tells her to be quick about it. Inside, she finds Elrond alone. She pleads with him, but he doesn't have the rings. He asks her what scares her so much she is willing to trust the rings. She responds with the surety that Sauron did not corrupt them. He then questions whether she is free of his influence. She backs away with what I'm sure is supposed to be a hurt look, but, well, Morfydd Clark. She tells him she did what she thought was right, and only time will tell if she was right. He looks at her and asks her what time she thinks she has. Only then does it occur to her that neither the rings nor Círdan are present. He shoots back at her that he did as he felt was right. They cut to Círdan sailing out to sea, the pouch sitting on a bench next to him. Back in the desert, the wizard and Nori are setting up a trap for the person trailing them. They lay down a trip line and wait. Someone comes along and falls over it. Nori throws a blanket over them, and both the wizard and Nori approach with rocks set to bash them. Unfortunately, it turns out to be Poppy, which I called at the end of last season. They just took an extra episode to get it done. They are sitting around the fire that night, Nori happy to see her. Nori wonders that she caught up to them, but the wizard tells Poppy that they are lost when the hobbit tells them that they didn't get very far. Poppy conveniently has a map. She pulls it out and tells them that the hobbits must have passed that way a long time ago. Again, conveniently. The song the hobbits sing is apparently the key to keeping on track in that particular desert, with landmarks featured in the lyrics. Poppy quickly leads them, the transition across the land a little better in this sequence than in the entirety of the last season, where people just appeared places no matter how far or what sequence of events were going on in the story at that time. That night, Rhûn appears across the landscape shot under a full moon. Poppy asks the wizard why he looks like he has been there before, and he tells her only in dreams. And of course, they are still being followed by Spyglass Dudette. He and his companion look a little too narrow in the shoulders to be dudes. Not to mention Eminem and her backup singers were all women before they got wraithed, messing about with the wizard and trying to hurt Nori. Although Spyglass Dudette does have different clothing aesthetic. Círdan reaches the crevice he is planning on dropping the rings into. Just as he's about to do so, the sea flows upward, knocking Círdan sideways and making him drop the pouch into the boat. He picks it up and looks into the pouch wonderingly. It opened a bit when falling, and he pours the rings into his hand. Not Aragorn is dreaming about himself being killed by the orcs in his other form. He wakes to find Adar standing over him. He tells Not Aragorn that he was in his position once. He then exposition dumps his origin story, how he was twisted by Morgoth and first met Sauron. He then informs Not Aragorn that his people have been set free. He wants to know what Not Aragorn knows about Sauron. He tells Adar that Sauron has assumed a new form, a form he does not know. Adar asks what use he is if he doesn't know what Sauron looks like. Not Aragorn reminds him that he has the trust of the elves. He offers to seek himself out while Adar marshals his forces in preparation to destroy Sauron. Krusty McFarmer approaches at Adar's nod and asks Aragorn if he pledges his allegiance to Adar. After a pregnant pause, he answers yes. Krusty tells him to kneel and swear it. He begins the vow when Adar tells him to do it with Not Aragorn's head at Adar's feet. Not Aragorn places his head at Adar's feet, swearing to serve the Lord of Mordor to the end of his days, and his own. And the look in his eyes suggests Adar is not long for this world, as Not Aragorn smiles. He is then shown riding a horse out of the orc camp, right by Adar and Krusty. Krusty watches him leave and then goes to Not Aragorn's cell. He is muttering Not Aragorn's promise to kill him when Adar sets him free. When he gets there, he notices that there is something under the blanket in the cell. He kicks it to a loud clank and a pained foot. Pulling the blanket off, he sees a warg collar, which is when the warg comes in and eats him. Not Aragorn stops on the hill overlooking the orc camp, hearing Krusty being eaten. Adar watches him leave. Back with the elves, Gil-galad is singing a mournful song in Elvish as the elves proceed to the dying tree, looking up at it with sadness. He tells the elves that they need to leave for Valinor, which is when Círdan walks in. He approaches the king and tells him that perfection does not only exist in Valinor, that Celebrimbor has brought it to Middle-earth, showing he is wearing one of the rings. He then shows the other two, handing them to the king. Elrond shouts and the king drops the rings. One lands at his feet, while the other bounces down the steps to Galadriel. She picks it up trance-like. Elrond begs her not to put it on, but she does so anyway. Gil-galad puts on the one at his feet. The sun comes out from behind the clouds, and leaves start floating back up to reattach to the tree healing. And the CGI is awful. Elrond watches this and then leaves, somehow not under arrest after disobeying an order from the king. But then, that is rampant on this show. And then they do a reenactment of the shot from Peter Jackson's The Fellowship of the Rings, where the three elven ring bearers stand with their hands showing the rings in a triquetra formation. In Eregion, Celebrimbor's new workshop is done, and the forge is lit. His apprentice comes in to admire it, and he tells her he hopes the rings worked so they get to use it. She then tells him that a messenger from the Southlands has arrived. He wants to negotiate. Not Aragorn is at the gate, smiling. Celebrimbor allows him in, and the episode ends with ominous music. I will start by saying that this episode is better in some ways to the premiere of the first season, and worse in others. It was better in that it was not mind-numbingly boring like Season 1's premiere. It was worse in the amount of lore it got busy destroying right off the bat. Some of the latter is due to the idiotic time compression the showrunner decided was a good idea. The rest of it was hubris on the part of the people writing the script, thinking they could even approach something written by a grandmaster of the fantasy genre. The showrunners themselves admitted the first season had pacing issues, and they seemed to focus a lot of attention on assuring that was not a problem this season. They sort of ameliorated that in a lot of respects. It was still complete dog shit, but it was fast-paced dog shit that did not have you falling asleep about 15 minutes into the show. I still checked the amount of time left 2 or 3 times, but it was more about content rather than pacing. Having said that, let's break this down, shall we? In isolation, the entire opening sequence with Sauron being betrayed and Adar and the orcs trying to assassinate him at his own coronation kind of worked for me, right up until people opened their mouths. The dialogue in this show is still utter dreck, produced by people enamored with their own self-perceived brilliance. Sauron's speech was terrible and more than mildly idiotic. What kind of drooling imbecile tells a room full of orcs that he is going to sacrifice a bunch of them on the altar of his own ambition to unite the entirety of the world under his own banner? Well, apparently the kind that gets stabbed by his own ridiculously pointy crown and then prison shanked by said room full of orcs. That he was not dead was obvious because he has to live until Isildur slices his fingers off, causing him to lose the One Ring. And it is the whole Isildur dies in the aftermath of the volcano thing all over again. Nobody who is in The Lord of the Rings can die in this series. That means Sauron, Galadriel, and Elrond, plus if the wizard is Gandalf, all live through whatever they decide to write up for the Rings of Power. For some reason, the writers on this show don't understand how drama and tension work. You cannot build drama and tension by holding the possible death of a character out as bait if everyone knows he or she can't die yet. Nobody watching Sauron get Caesared could possibly have thought he was in peril. I sat watching that, waiting for him to obliterate everyone there. Of course, I forgot sophomoric incompetence were involved and they would want to draw this shit out for as long as possible. The CGI used for Blob Sauron was terrible. The concept was good enough, but the execution was shoddy at best. Why the writers then have him head right back to take on the orcs is beyond me. For that seems to be the plan until he runs into the old man and his group of refugees. And how the hell is one man so unlucky that he runs into more than one sea monster in a lifetime? Never mind how short a time between beginning of the Rings of Power Season 1 and this episode. You can't tell me the oceans are simply that dangerous or nobody would attempt to sail them. Not even the elves, unless they had some kind of beast-taming skill that let them steer the creatures away from their ships. The entire raft scene was bizarre, and seemed like there was more to it, but the editors cut it down to bare bones and left the bare bones in the show. I got the feeling the editors cut a fair bit out to keep up the pacing because there were multiple instances of this throughout the episode. Then we get jarred out of whatever we thought was going on at the end of last season as Galadriel is chasing down Elrond to get the rings from him. Why? So they have a difference of opinion over whether to use them or not. How did this result in her herring after him as they both gallop to the king? Why not simply go to the king and present their arguments for whether or not to use them? Oh, that's right. Because then the story, stupid as it is, couldn't happen. Like much of the bad writing in Hollywood these days, this entire plotline requires characters to act like imbeciles rather than intelligent people. There's no foundation for Elrond's fears in this episode, and you know that because every time he argues against using the rings, words like might, could have, and maybe are used to put forth his position. And it definitely does not come from the lore either. since they threw that out the window by having the 3 rings made first rather than after the 7 and the 9. Had they followed what Tolkien explicitly wrote, this entire plotline becomes moot. The elven ring bearers wore their rings through the entire Third Age without worry because they were powerful enough to hide them from the One Ring's influence. We know this because Gil-galad, Galadriel, and first Círdan and then Gandalf wore them right through the final destruction of Sauron when Frodo, Sam, and Gollum get the One Ring to Mount Doom and Gollum falls into the volcano with it. That they have Elrond get more than a little Gollumish by not wanting to give up the rings and doing a header into the waterfall was completely moronic, not to mention out of character for Elrond. Elrond, like Galadriel, has been so nerfed in the Rings of Power that it is silly. It was not for nothing that Gandalf described Elrond as a powerful elf lord when telling Frodo they would take the One Ring to him to help figure out what to do with it. And why the hell does not Aragorn show back up in Mordor as a slave, try to bargain for the humans' freedom from Adar's people, and then promise to serve himself while also promising to search for himself? The whole sequence was maddening. It is yet another part of the episode that felt like there was a lot more to it that wound up being left on the editing room floor. It was nice to see Krusty McFarmer get eaten by a warg. Well, not see so much as hear. I guess there was not enough in the CGI budget of the billion-dollar show to let people actually see that happen. Instead, we get to hear it, while seeing both Adar and not Aragorn listen to it with us. The entire sequence of scenes with the wizard and Nori was... I don't really have a word for it. Not quite annoying, not quite stupid, not quite boring, but yet a mixture of a hint of all of them. How exactly does a wizard get lost? And how exactly did Poppy find them in the middle of a desert wasteland? The further you get away from someone, the easier it is to miss them when you look for them. A mere degree off of their path, and you will never find them. Yet Poppy does. At no point in the first season did it show any of the hobbits to be good trackers, especially Poppy. And how did she convince the crotchety old black ladies to part with the sacred hobbit writings that were usually only handled by elders? And how convenient is it that The Way Through the Wilderness is a song the hobbits still sing despite not having been back that way in so long nobody remembered it? And who are the Golden Skull Lurkers? They have the physique of women despite being covered head to toe in black. And given their palette choice in clothing, are they enemies of Eminem and her backup singers? Or are they allies? If the first, what are their feelings toward a wizard Eminem was trying to court into coming back with them to Rhûn? These are not exactly good people if they are like Eminem. If the last season was anything to go by, the answers to all of those questions will either be lacking or stupid when we finally do get them. The introduction to Círdan was disappointing. First of all was his casting. Like the rest of the elves in this series, he looked nothing like an elf. It was not merely his age, which they also got wrong. If he did not have pointy ears, I would not have guessed he was an elf. And they did get the age wrong. Yes, Círdan was the eldest and wisest elf on Middle-earth. However, he was not old-looking. He would not get that way until the Third Age. The simpletons running the Rings of Power for Amazon Prime do not seem to be able to grasp the idea of immortality in elves. By the end of the Third Age, Galadriel would have been thousands upon thousands of years old, and considered one of the elders of the elven race, wise and powerful in her years. And yet, in no way would anyone dare describe her as anything other than ethereally beautiful. The same goes for the men. They too would still be considered inhumanly handsome, even pretty, even though they might be millennia old. Círdan only begins to look old after the fall of Sauron and the beginning of the Third Age. In the Second Age, he would have been a hale and strong shipwright and seaman, respected for his wisdom and prescience, not the somewhat weak-looking old man they present him to be in this episode. That he also goes along with Elrond's desire to get rid of the rings, praising him by saying his father would be proud, is not Círdan. Círdan would not have needed to go out to sea to learn the rings would help the elves, and he would also have been able to see the trouble they might cause in the future. But then we get back to how badly McKay and Payne have butchered lore in this show. Why does the king need to send a letter to Celebrimbor to let him know not to trust not Aragorn? Why the hell would Galadriel and Elrond leave his workshop for the king's palace and not warn him about not Aragorn being Sauron? That whole thing was beyond retarded. And how is Gil-galad still king, given how both Galadriel and Elrond feel quite secure in flagrantly disobeying direct orders from him? He has been shown wildly out of character from the lore, and his leadership shown in this show is weak and ineffectual if he cannot keep two elves from making him look like an idiot. The scene with the elves about to vacate Middle-earth because their stupid tree is dying was just so badly done. From the CGI to the acting to the slow-mo to Elrond leaving because the rings worked to the blatant ripoff of Peter Jackson, none of it worked. First of all, how is Elrond not in chains? Not only did he disobey a direct order from the king, he absconded with the one thing that would save the elves and prevent them from abandoning Middle-earth to the orcs and Sauron. That the rings worked was never really in doubt. They spent a large part of the season finale working on that. Why wouldn't it? So why the slow-mo and the terrible CGI? It did not have to be that elaborate, and therefore would have been less glaringly bad. The actor playing Círdan was probably worse than Morfydd Clark in this scene, looking like a manic lunatic as he approached the king. His acting in the scenes with Elrond weren't great either, but I thought it was just that the director was going for that for his character. The penultimate scene sort of negated that thinking. And we end with something that never should have happened if everyone in this show was not a complete and total moron. Not Aragorn showing up at Celebrimbor's new workshop and the idiot master craftsman not knowing he is Sauron. What about not Aragorn's actions in the first season made Galadriel and Elrond think he would not return to use Celebrimbor in crafting the tools for his scheme? A 2-second talk with Celebrimbor before the two idiots left for the king would have had Sauron in chains or all the elves at the workshop dead. Either way, not Aragorn doesn't have Celebrimbor at his beck and call, and whatever comes of it doesn't happen. And that sort of sums up the entire run of the Rings of Power thus far. Stupid characters written out of line with what Tolkien actually wrote them as, making stupid decisions that lead inevitably to bad results. That was the entire first season, and this season seems to be going that way. Sauron doesn't blatantly tell the orcs he is going to get a lot of them killed in the name of creating his new world order, and Sauron isn't shanked by a bunch of angry orcs. Elrond doesn't act like a moron who wants to doom Middle-earth just to keep the rings from being worn, and his entire plotline doesn't happen. And no, his justification for it is not much better than Galadriel's reason for dragging her men hither and yon at the beginning of the first season, leading to them mutinying. The scenes with the wizard and Nori are so devoid of foundation and meaning that one cannot even parse the level of stupid. How did they get lost in the wilderness? Why would they be stupid enough to walk into a desert without proper supplies? Why would Poppy set out alone to try to catch up to them instead of simply going with them from the start at the end of season 1? Why would they assume nobody besides Eminem and her posse would be on the lookout for the wizard. And once you start asking questions just about the wizard and Poppy, you come up with more. Why would Krusty McFarmer beat someone who very well might one day be in a position to pay him back when there are powerless humans aplenty that he could torment? Why was Círdan, the supposed wisest of elves, so retarded as to be swayed by Elrond's maybe-filled arguments? And why was Celebrimbor? Why was Celebrimbor? He has been a terrible character since the second he stepped on screen in the first episode, and he did not get better thereafter. How exactly does an ages-old elf need to be told how to make an alloy by not Aragorn? Celebrimbor might be the second most nerfed character in the entire show behind Galadriel, and that is saying something. I have no expectations for Season 2 of The Rings of Power to be any better than the first. Why? Because during the supposed mea culpa interviews immediately following the finale of Season 1, before the higher-ups came up with the narrative that the season performed poorly because of the fascist and evil Tolkien fans, Payne and McKay showed all the signs of either having learned nothing or having learned the wrong things from Season 1. And this first episode merely confirms that. The lore is still being bastardized to a level that is not only shocking, but is actually making the story they have written dumber when following the lore would smooth some of their problems out. Also, one of the first things that came out about the second season was their announcement that they would have all female directors for Season 2, as if that was actually a positive adjustment to alleviate some of the issues with the first season. None of what came out following Season 1 hinted they were learning the lessons that they were there to learn. Rather, everything pointed to them doubling and tripling down on what they did in the first season and plastering over it with platitudes and pandering. But at least the pacing will be better. Maybe. That is all I have for this video. It is a little late because I'm currently out of town at the time of recording, and it was the quickest I could get around to putting something together. I will endeavor to get the second and third episodes out before the next episode drop on Amazon, but given they dumped 3 episodes this time, I might not get it done in time. If you like the video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and comment down below. I appreciate it all, and it helps out the channel. Until next time. Tschüss.